What if the greatest fantasy stories I have ever loved are the ones you have never heard of? I am not talking about the ones dominating bestseller lists. I am not talking about those adapted into billion-dollar franchises. I am talking about the quiet masterpieces. They lie buried beneath louder titles. They wait patiently on dusty shelves. Think about the last fantasy novel I read. Chances are, it had been highly recommended to me. Maybe it was trending on social media when I picked it up. Maybe it had a cinematic cover and a familiar name. But what if I have been walking past worlds that could change me? Worlds just as rich, just as magical, just as devastating, yet somehow overlooked. There is something almost tragic about an underrated fantasy novel. It is like a kingdom without visitors, a spell never spoken aloud, a dragon that never gets to fly. Today, I am opening 5 of those forgotten gates. 5 stories that deserved louder applause. 5 authors who built entire universes in silence. For me, fantasy is not just about popularity. It is about immersion. It is about wonder. It is about losing yourself so completely that the real world feels like the dream. Somewhere out there is a book that will grip my imagination differently. Not louder, but deeper. And deeper stories linger longer. They haunt me. They whisper back to me months later. They show up in my thoughts at 2 in the morning. The tragedy is that many readers never discover them because marketing often overshadows magic. Hype often drowns craftsmanship, and algorithms rarely reward quiet brilliance. But I have found that readers who dig a little deeper find treasure, and that is what I am doing here. Treasure hunting in the realm of fantasy. Today I am not here to tear down popular books. It is about lifting up the hidden ones, the underdogs of imagination, the stories that deserved more light. I imagine finishing a novel and thinking, why is no one talking about this? That moment of disbelief, that quiet anger at the universe, that feeling of discovering something precious. That is the energy I am chasing today. Because the best discoveries often feel personal, like the book was waiting just for me. Get comfortable. Clear your mental bookshelf. I am about to explore 5 fantasy novels that deserved far more recognition than they received. And the first one might surprise me more than I expect. I'll begin with a fantasy novel that quietly challenges the genre without relying on shock value. The Shadow of the Torturer by Gene Wolfe may sound intense from the title alone, but what makes it powerful isn't graphic action. It's perspective, it's psychology, it's atmosphere. At first glance, it seems like a traditional coming-of-age story. A young apprentice is raised inside a rigid order, a strict code, a looming exile, a journey into the unknown. But very quickly, I realize this story operates on a deeper level. The world feels layered and mysterious. Ancient traditions blend with subtle hints of advanced knowledge. The setting feels both distant and strangely futuristic. And then there is the narrator. Severian tells his own story. He claims he remembers everything perfectly. That sounds impressive at first, but it also raises questions. Can anyone truly remember everything? Can memory ever be fully objective? That small idea transforms the entire reading experience. Suddenly, I'm not just following events, I'm analyzing them. The novel becomes a puzzle, not because it's confusing, but because it's layered. Wolf doesn't rely on fast action sequences. He builds tension through reflection, through subtle world building, through philosophical undertones. The journey Severian takes is physical, but it's also intellectual. Each encounter reveals more about his character, about morality, about identity, about responsibility. The tone remains thoughtful rather than sensational. The focus stays on ideas rather than spectacle. And that might be why this novel isn't always highlighted in mainstream fantasy conversations. It doesn't chase trends. It doesn't simplify itself for mass appeal. It respects my intelligence. It assumes I'm willing to think deeply. And for me, that's incredibly rewarding. I begin to notice recurring symbols, subtle shifts in tone, quiet questions about truth and storytelling. By the end, I realized the book wasn't just telling a story. It was examining how stories are told. It invites me to question perception itself. That kind of layered storytelling doesn't always go viral, but it stays with me. If I appreciate thoughtful fantasy that challenges my mind, this hidden gem absolutely deserves my attention. Here's the twist I never hear anyone talk about. Maybe I believe these novels aren't underrated because readers miss at them. Maybe they're underrated because they refuse to fit inside my expectations. I've noticed that fantasy has quietly trained me to look for certain signals. I expect massive battles. I expect clear villains. I expect chosen ones. I expect explosive magic systems. I wonder what happens when a story chooses intimacy over spectacle. I wonder what happens when the real battle is internal. That's where a hidden masterpiece entered my reading life. I found The Curse of Shallion by Lois McMaster Bujold, and it didn't open with thunder. It opens with exhaustion. I meet a broken man returning home. I see a soldier worn down by betrayal. I notice no grand prophecy announces his arrival. I find no glowing sword waiting in a stone. Instead, I find trauma, politics, and quiet faith. I see that Kazaril is not young. I see he is not invincible. I see he is not destined for glory. That alone subverts the genre for me. I've noticed fantasy rarely centers the weary. I notice it rarely lingers on scars. I notice it rarely asks what survival truly costs. As Kazaril becomes entangled in court intrigue, I feel the stakes rise slowly. I realize the tension does not come from armies. I see it comes from curses. I notice gods intervene subtly. I see political manipulation that feels painfully real. And here is the deeper insight I had. I realize the most powerful magic in this book is not flashy at all. I see that it is sacrifice. Boy, that it is loyalty. I see that it is moral courage. Suddenly, I realize something unsettling. Maybe I have confused scale with depth. Maybe I have equated noise with importance. This story proves to me that quiet fantasy can hit harder than epic wars. It forces me to rethink what makes a book memorable. I ask whether it is the size of the battlefield that matters, or is it the weight of a single decision? Bajold's world feels lived in rather than performed to me. They feel mysterious rather than theatrical to me. And the emotional payoff feels earned rather than engineered to me. That is why I think some readers overlook it at first glance. It does not market itself as revolutionary. Yet I feel it quietly redefines heroism. The twist for me is not just about these books. It is about how I choose what to value. It is about what I scroll past. It is about what I assume will not impress me. Once I recognized that pattern, I started wondering how many other masterpieces I had ignored. Because the next underrated novel I find could not just challenge fantasy conventions, it could challenge my sense of reality. Now I step into a world that doesn't just tell a story, it rearranges my sense of reality. The Golem and the Jinni by Helene Wecker sounds almost whimsical at first. I see a creature of clay. I see a being of smokeless fire. Both are stranded in 1899 New York City. It feels like folklore stitched into history. But beneath that premise lies something profound. This isn't a tale of conquest. It's a tale of belonging. Chava, the Golem, was created to obey. Ahmad, the Jinni, was born to be free. Both find themselves alone in a city that doesn't understand them. And maybe that's the quiet brilliance of this novel. It speaks to anyone who has ever felt out of place. The magic isn't loud, it's restrained, it's intimate, it's deeply human. Their powers exist, but they're not the focus. Their isolation is. Their longing is. Their struggle to blend into a world not built for them is. I start reading for the fantasy. I keep reading for the emotion. The historical setting adds weight rather than decoration. Immigrant neighborhoods pulse with life. Cultures collide softly. Identities blur at the edges. And slowly, I realize something powerful. This novel isn't asking whether magic exists. It's asking what it means to be human. That's a different kind of fantasy. The kind that lingers in my chest. The kind that doesn't need dragons to feel epic. It's underrated because it defies easy classification. Is it historical fiction? Is it myth? Is it urban fantasy? The answer is yes. And that refusal to fit neatly into a box kept it from becoming mainstream phenomenon. But readers who discovered it often call it unforgettable because it doesn't just entertain, it empathizes. It quietly asks me to examine my own sense of identity. And that's what the best underrated books do. They connect instead of compete. They resonate instead of roar. By now, I notice a pattern forming. None of these novels chase spectacle. They chase meaning. They prioritize depth over dazzle. And that might be exactly why they slipped beneath the spotlight. But I'm not done yet. Because the final hidden gem brings everything together in a way that demands action from me. By now, I might be realizing something uncomfortable. I have learned that the most powerful stories are not always the loudest. Often, they are the ones I almost did not pick up. That brings me to my final hidden masterpiece. Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke is anything but small in ambition. For years, I watched it live in the shadow of flashier fantasy sagas. Set in a 19th century England reimagined, it shows a world where magic once thrived. In the story's present day, magic is treated as history. I find it feels academic, distant, and forgotten. Then I watch two very different magicians attempt to revive that lost art. One is cautious and scholarly. The other is daring and impulsive. What unfolds to me is not a simple rivalry. It becomes a meditation on power, ego, and control. It also shows the cost of awakening something ancient. I notice Clark writes with deliberate patience. She uses long passages, detailed footnotes, and a voice that mimics classic literature. I know some readers bounce off that style. I have seen others fall completely under its spell. To me, this novel does not just create magic. It studies magic, dissects it, and asks who deserves it. In doing so, I think it becomes quietly revolutionary. It proves that fantasy can be intellectual without losing wonder. It proves it can feel historical and imaginative at the same time. It proves it can challenge you and still enchant you. And that is the bigger picture I want to share. These 5 novels I highlight share something essential. They respect the reader and refuse to simplify themselves for mass appeal. They prioritize substance over spectacle. That is why I believe they deserve a read, not because they are obscure, but because they are brave. They are brave enough to be different, brave enough to take risks, and brave enough to trust that someone would understand. Maybe I am speaking to you. So the next time I walk into a bookstore or scroll through recommendations, I pause. I look beyond trending lists and loud marketing campaigns. I search for the quiet titles, the ones with fewer reviews but deeper praise. I search for the books that do not scream for attention, because hidden inside them might be the story that changes me. Hidden within might be the world that reshapes my imagination. Hidden within might be the characters who stay with me long after the final page. When I find that book, I realize that discovering the underrated is its own kind of magic.